Hey everybody, how you doing today? So this is our last class of Module 5. It's kind of crazy. It's been 2 weeks. We've got one more topic to go through, but it's really kind of more of an ancillary topic. Just one I wanted to stick at the end, just to make sure you all are familiar with some of these concepts. But really, like what we talked about yesterday, that was kind of the pinnacle. Like that's really the sort of end goal of this module for you to understand that information. And this weekend, we're going to have a project to work on that's going to really hopefully help cement that. Yeah, it's a double caffeine kind of day. Kelly's not joking. But the weekend project, or what your exercise is going to be at the end of the day, is this New York Times thing I keep bringing up over and over again. So some of you maybe already have gotten a start on it, but if not, it's going to be a lot like the exercises from last night. I might even say a little bit easier and a little bit more fun. Because with this New York Times one, the endpoint's a lot better documented, and you get to have some fun laying some stuff out with CSS and HTML, and it's not just JavaScript. So, okay. So without further ado, let's get into this. Today, we are going to be talking about cores and caching. So these are two kind of unrelated topics, but ones that I definitely think we should cover, and they're not like full day topics. So first of all, cores, another acronym. So cores stands for cross-origin resource sharing. And it's a browser security feature. So the key thing to call out there is this is only something that happens in web browsers. So if you make a request in Postman or curl, not going to run into this. This is only a web browser thing. So at least so far, that means anything you make with Axios, you're going to run into cores, or it could be a potential problem. Cores could be. And it is the total bane of the web developer's existence, especially a front-end web developer. So let's give you an example of what something cores related looks like. Have you run into an error kind of like this yet? The key thing to clue in on there, it says like no access control allow origin. Like it's going to be like access control allow something. These sort of errors you'll sometimes see right after you make a request with Axios or make a request in the web browser. And what's weird is you'll like look around all the diagnostic tools, and it'll look like the request was successful. But like you take a look at the data you get back, and it's just kind of like empty. And it's kind of a weird thing. Like it's not it can often leave people ending up feeling pretty lost. So I want to demystify it, because you are definitely going to run into it in the next module, or in the next few modules, probably in the next module. So in order to talk about what cores actually is, I've got to talk about an important concept, which is what's called the same origin policy, or the difference between same origin and cross origin. So cores cross origin, there we go, that's the first part of cores. So there's really two types of JavaScript initiated HTTP requests. So when I say JavaScript initiated HTTP requests, I mean requests being made with Axios. So there are requests that go to the same origin. So something like making a request to the same domain that you're currently on. So for example, on module5.ml, that's like making a request to module5.ml/fruit. But there's another kind of request, which we actually haven't done so far in this module, and I've done that very purposefully. And that's what's called a cross-origin request. And that's a request that's made to a completely different domain name. So that's like on module5.ml, making a request to like example.com. And what's the big deal here? Like, why are these different? Well, before I get to that though, JavaScript can only make HTTP requests to endpoints in the same origin. Like, except there is a little loophole that allows you to make them cross-origin under some special circumstances. That's what we're going to talk about. That's what cores is. But by default, JavaScript can only make HTTP requests to endpoints in the same origin. So if I'm on module5.ml and I want to make a request to like another origin, I want to make a request to like example.com, I can't do that by default. It is something the browser will not let you do. And you can try to work around it all you want, but it's not really a thing you can circumvent. It's a security feature built into the web browser. So let me prove this to you. So I'm going to go over here, open up, I'm going to go to module5.ml. I'm going to open up a JavaScript console here, make it kind of big. Now I'm going to put that on my clipboard, I guess. Okay. There we go. Didn't work. Access control allow origin. There we go. But note that if I do like module5.ml, that totally works. You don't get an error. So now that I've proved to you that this is actually a thing that happens, and you're welcome to give this a try on your own, by the way. Open up the module 5 page, try to make a request to something that isn't a, well, let me just paste this, something that isn't something on module5.ml, like careersincode.org, could do google.com, whatever you want. For the most part, you're not going to be able to make any of these requests. They're just going to give you back this error. So the question often comes up, why? Like, it seems like that'd be a really helpful thing, like to be able to make requests from one domain to another domain. And there's a few reasons that are all security related, but I think the easiest one to explain, and the one that's going to give you kind of the mindset as to why this is a problem, is talking about cookies. So if you recall from earlier this week, we talked about cookies. And cookies are sort of information that is sent along with HTTP requests made from the browser in the headers. And when you make a request to a server, the browser by default includes cookie information in that header, in that cookie header. And then it gets returned back, and the browser saves it, and the server can modify the cookie data, or the browser can modify the cookie data. But whenever a request is made to that domain, that cookie is included. On the surface, that seems totally fine. Like, yeah, that makes sense. But let's walk through an interesting scenario. Let's say maybe you're working at Google and you're working on gmail.com. And you've got an API endpoint on gmail.com to delete an email. So recall from yesterday, there's an emails resource here. We've maybe got an email with like the ID of 123. And we're deleting it. So kind of follows sort of the REST patterns. And yeah, this is fine. Someone clicks on a button on gmail.com, makes a request to the server, deletes it, gets a thing to come back, gets a 200. All great. What's the problem? Well, let's swap out gmail.com for something else. Let's say you're on like another completely different site, and you click on a button, and that website uses your browser to make a request to gmail.com/email/1223 and deletes one of your emails. If you're sending along cookies, those cookies are sent whenever a request is made to that domain. There's going to be no way for that domain to tell, like, oh, that request came from one page in the web browser versus another page in the web browser. Like, there's nothing really to disambiguate that. So you could, like, if all these rules didn't exist, like, there would be a pervasive problem on the internet where you click on buttons and like accidentally cause things to happen in unrelated services, like cause data to be deleted. Like, there'd be a real security problem. I mean, or imagine taking this one step further. The endpoint isn't deleting an email, it's like changing your password. Now you're locked out of your account and someone has complete control over an account on a completely unrelated service. Like, that'd be pretty bad. So that's why this rule exists, or this is one of the reasons why this rule exists. Does this sort of conceptually make sense? Cool. Okay. So this attack has a name, and you'll hear it thrown around, and you're going to talk about this almost definitely in the security module. It's called a cross-site request forgery, or a CSRF. This sort of attack where one web page will try to talk to another web page's servers and pretend to be on the same origin, or pretend to be like pretend to modify that data in a way it shouldn't. And there are tons of, like, throughout the history of the internet, like early on, it was discovered this is a problem. Like once JavaScript became a thing, kind of even a little before JavaScript too, this was a problem. And a bunch of solutions have been proposed and implemented over the years. And Cores is kind of the latest one that seems like it's doing a good enough job where like it's gonna stick around for a while. So because Cores exists, this cross-site request forgery thing isn't possible in this certain way we're talking about. There are other little there are other ways you can form a CSRF, but at least in this sort of situation, you can't do it. So Brandy asked, would the use of a proxy bypass this? By proxy, you mean like a proxy server you'd set up with your computer? I just want to make sure I understand what you're asking. Okay. So it wouldn't, because the way a proxy works is it's taking all the internet traffic from your computer and sort of transparently passing it through the proxy. So the cookies being saved are still saved on your computer, and from your computer's perspective, you're talking to a server, and you're talking to the proxy server, which is like talking to another server. It's like a person in the middle kind of relaying your information. So from the browser's perspective, it wouldn't matter because you're still talking to a server, and the cookies are saved on the local system. So like where you actually send those cookies to is not going to be a problem, I think. Does that make sense? Okay. Sweet. So of course, sometimes we really want to do this. Like web APIs, like the whole idea of a web API is a cross-origin request, or often is a cross-origin request. Like api.github.com from yesterday. If we're making a request to that, like we're by nature not going to be on github.com. We're not going to be on api.github.com. We're going to be on a completely different service. We're going to be in a completely different location. So like, how do we handle this? Like, this is a thing. You want to sometimes be able to do cross-site requests, or cross-origin requests, but sometimes they're obviously bad and have problems. So the answer is Cores, and in particular, kind of the most important thing you should know about Cores is this concept of a pre-flight request. So a pre-flight request is a request made before your actual request. And this pre-flight request has a special request method called options. And when you think of an options request, you should tie in your head options with the HTTP method options and Cores. They're kind of synonymous. Really, Cores are those, only Cores really deals with option requests. No one else really, no other service really uses them for anything. So what happens is when you make a cross-origin request, your browser transparently behind the scenes makes a request to the server to the same exact URL, but just replaces the method with options. And then in the request headers, it includes a bunch of information about the request. So you can see like here, access control request method, this request header, delete. There's a bunch of these other headers that get included depending on the information you specify, but they all start with access control. That's another thing. You see those access control headers, you should immediately think Cores. Like that's another thing that's synonymous with Cores. So when the server receives this options request, it decodes it, it takes a look at the headers, and then it responds to the request and basically says like, yeah, this is good to go. This browser can make a cross-origin request to me. Or it says like, nah, never mind. This is a nefarious user, disregard the request. And if the options request returns a non 200 status, or a non like 200 class status. So like something that doesn't start with a 2, like a 400 or a 500 really. Then the browser's just going to stop and not actually make your request. So the thing to bring up here, the thing to note here is, like I said, this is a web browser only thing. And I'm calling that out because this sort of functionality happens at the web browser level. Like the web browser is what's enforcing this. In a web browser, if you make a cross-origin request, you cannot make a request that does not trigger one of these options requests. A small asterisk we're going to get to at the end, but for the most part, you cannot. It's just built into the browser. It's just the nature of how browsers work. For them to implement the web specifications properly, they have to do this. So let's show you a couple of these in action. Now, before we get into this, I want to say something that's super confusing about the way that Chrome Developer Tools shows these. The way Chrome Dev Tools works, let me start with the way it used to work, because the way it used to work made a lot more sense. The way it used to work is every single time you make a request with Axios or with any sort of JavaScript request library in JavaScript, it would show you in the network pane, it would show you a row for the options request and it would show you a row for the actual request. So you could take a look at the options request. You could see like, okay, it was successful. Okay, now it's successful. I can see it made the actual request. And if the options request wasn't successful, you'd see, oh, the options request failed. And then below it, you wouldn't see another request. You just see one request. And that's how you think this would work. I mean, it matches how it actually works. It makes it really easy to debug. For some complicated reasons I'm not going to get into that have to do with security, Chrome decided that that was no longer how it was going to work. So the way Chrome Dev Tools works now, and I'll be honest, I didn't know this until this morning when I was trying all this out and I had to do some research on it. But the way it works now is it only if your request succeeds, the options request succeeds, then it's going to show you the actual request. So it's going to omit the options request from the list. It's just going to show you the final request that succeeded. However, if the options request fails, it'll show the options request and not the final request. So basically, like, if the options request fails, you're going to see it. If the options request is successful, you're not going to see it. And I guess I understand, like, from a user perspective, like, you probably don't want all those options requests cluttering up your big list of requests you're looking at. But it makes it really kind of harder to understand what's going on under the hood. And for an exercise like this, it's not as straightforward. So I'm going to do my best to try to walk through this, but like, keep that in mind. And if you have questions, please speak up. Okay. So here's my first request. I'm going to, it's a little wider. I'm going to clear the network over here. Okay. Also notice I'm not assigning this to a promise or anything. I'm just running these. I don't really care what the return value is or what. I don't care about unwrapping the data inside of the promise. So I'm just kind of disregarding it. In practice, you, of course, would probably put this into a promise and take a look at the data, because the response data you get back from the request, it's kind of the part of the reason you're making the request, isn't it? So, okay. You see, this first one didn't work. I'm going to go over here, and you're going to see, I need to make this. Okay, there we go. So you're going to see that, oh, how about that? It's going to show, oh, yeah, okay, this is going to work. Cool. So you can see here, here's the options request it makes. It's got a request method of options. And you can notice when I made this request over here, it's a put request, and it's got this custom header x hello. You'll see over here in the request headers, access control request method is put, and it's also given a list of all the headers that I've specified, just so that, because maybe like as a browser, you don't want to receive some certain requests with certain headers. Like maybe you want to just say, like, if people are sending certain headers, you want to block them. I've never run into a situation where that's the case, but the specification allows for it. And you can see in response, I get back at 200. But here's the thing. There's one other limitation I didn't mention, which I should have called out. If you read through this error message, it says, this request has been blocked by a CORS policy. Response to pre-flight request doesn't pass access control check. No access control allow origin header as present in the requested resource. So that's something else to call out here too. The way that I kind of skipped over this in the previous slide and I shouldn't have, but when the response comes back, it's going to contain a bunch of these access control headers. If it doesn't contain these headers, it's not a valid options request. So the server's just going to or the client's just going to kind of reject it. Like it's got to, in order for the client to send a cross origin request, it's got to return a 200, and it's also got to return the proper access control headers to tell it that the request should proceed. And in this case, the client wanted it to send an access control allow origin header. And that didn't get sent. So it didn't proceed. It just kind of stopped. Now, you're probably wondering what's going on with the secondary request here. So this is where I was saying it can get kind of confusing. So in different versions of Chrome, it handles this a little bit differently. Like newer versions do it a little bit differently than the older versions. And I guess in the one I'm running on this computer, it shows that this request, I tried to make it, but it got a CORS error. So it actually does show both of them, which is kind of nice. So let's make a request here to this one. And this one, I'm talking to api.github.com. So if you remember from yesterday, this is an API. Like this should be something that should allow cross-origin requests. So if I make this, you'll see that it fails again. Like what the heck? What's going on? Well, this is these CORS errors. It's really important to read them. You saw before, like access control allow origin. Like these are errors you want to read through and kind of parse through. It's going to tell you what you're doing wrong or what the server is doing wrong. And reading through this, I see kind of the same sort of beginning part, but I say request header field x hello is not allowed by access control allow headers in pre-flight response. So notice I'm sending this x hello header here again. We go over here, you can see again this options request was successful, and it sent back a bunch of these access control headers here. Like it sent access control allow origin, that was the one we looked at last time. Says like access control allow headers. Now, what did this say? Request header field x hello is not allowed in access control allow headers. Now, I'm going to tell you what's going on here because this is something I've run into before. But this is the sort of thing where if you put this into Google, it would explain it very nicely for you. And there's so many different little permutations of how you can get these cross-origin requests wrong, where I don't really have time to like talk about every single one. But I'm just going to bring up like a couple sort of situations that can happen to give you an idea of the sort of things that can go wrong. In this example, this access control allow headers header that gets returned back from the pre-flight request has a list of headers that it allows to be sent along with that request. And if I go back over here, you can see I sent along x hello. If I go down here, x hello isn't in this big long list. So because of that, the browser says, wait a second, you're sending a request that doesn't match what the cross-origin server is expecting. Okay, nope, you can't do it. Blocked. It's like very, very strict. Like you have to match it exactly what it wants. You have to get it exactly perfect. And if you don't, it's just going to reject you. And this is why it's kind of the bane of a web developer's existence. Because if a server is either misconfigured or you're sending something you're not quite supposed to, the browser is just going to kind of stop your request without mercy, and you just have to. There's just a lot of debugging you have to do to get the request just perfect, so that they'll get through the core's system. So along this line, if I were to get rid of these headers, or maybe more accurately, let me do it like this, and then make this request again, you can see this time I got back a 404, but it worked. Like, it didn't give me a CORS error. And if you go back over here, you can see the options. I got back the same options, but I wasn't including the X hello header, so it let me through, and it allowed me to make the actual request. And of course, put doesn't exist at that location, but hopefully you can get the idea that like it's very strict about what you specify when you make cross-origin requests. And if the server is not happy with what you're sending, the server is going to reject those requests, and there's nothing you can do about it. And this final one was the one I just did. Is it starting making sense what I'm talking about here? Cool. I'm seeing some yeses, so let's keep going. So here's what's going on. And I really made this slide and the next slide as more reference, because I just said all this in class. But if you're having difficulty visualizing this, this is a sort of what's going on behind the scenes. So when you make an Axios.put or make an Axios request, it's making a request out with an options request. So this first part's the pre-flight request. Server decides if that request is what it wants to receive. And if it is, it sends back 200. Now the pre-flight was successful, so it's going to make the actual request, and you're going to get the actual response. And if it doesn't work, like the server decides this is not really something it wants, then the pre-flight's going to fail. It's just going to stop, and that's it. Now, there is an exception to this rule. And this exception is really for backwards compatibility reasons, and it's what is called a simple request. And this is the asterisk I mentioned I was going to talk about here. Some cross-origin requests are exempt from pre-flight requests for backwards compatibility reasons. And the exact rules here are a bit complicated and nuanced. And I'm going to open this up, and we can take a look here at them. So if your requests meet all of these following conditions, then it will not get hit with a pre-flight request, even if it's cross-origin. So it has to be a get, a head, or a post method. It can only use these headers. It can only use these values for the content type header. And there's a couple other things that are not relevant to this class, but a couple other restrictions we need to have too. So sometimes, if you're in a sort of a hostile environment where you're working with an API that does not really want you to interact with it, you have to play some games and utilize these sort of rules to try to make sure you don't get hit with the core's pre-flight request so you can actually talk to the API. But these rules are kind of engineered so that you can't do as many of these sort of nefarious actions. If you remember, like most of the sort in REST, most of the sort of updating or like changing operations, they're like posts, puts, and gets. Or sorry, posts, puts, and deletes. There's not really like get is just like reading information. So typically, a get is like not something you have to worry about causing that sort of like deleting your email problem. So like that's why that's allowed. And the head is a request that's very similar to a get. And the reason why post is allowed is for backwards compatibility reasons, but these extra restrictions make it a lot harder to do things that are nefarious with those posts. It's still possible. And that's why there are other ways other technologies people use to alleviate CSRFs as well. But CORS gets rid of a lot of the problems there. So this is a very complicated document. I was trying to find a simpler one when I was reviewing all this morning, and I couldn't really. I don't really have anything else to say there other than you don't really need to have these rules memorized. I definitely don't. You should just know that there are certain cross-origin requests that don't need pre-flights and they're like special. And if you run into it, then yay, cool. But for the most part, they're all cross-origin requests are going to need pre-flights. So cores is complex, and that's really like I just said a lot of details. I gave you a lot of information. Cores is complicated, and that's really what you should take away from this. Like, you're going to run into it. You should know that like words like options and access control, those headers mean cores. And when you run into that, like your head should be thinking cores, and you should look up like cores, include cores when you do whatever searches you're going to do. But it's complicated, and there's no expectation for you like anytime soon to have like a really good grasp on it. At work, well, not as much anymore because we've got things are a little bit more stable, but I have been into situations where I've run into lots of cores errors and it's taken me days to figure them out. Like it is a complicated thing. So don't feel bad if you struggle with them for a while, because I do even still. So cores exist and implement some complicated rules around cross-origin requests. Now, I'm thinking I wasn't able to really put together any sort of exercises for cores in particular, but I'm thinking it probably makes sense for all of you to go through these sorts of examples and try to make these requests in your browser and just see what happens. Take a look at the errors you see, take a look at how the browser responds, just so you're familiar with kind of the circumstances around what happens. So I'm going to put these into Slack, and I suggest open up module5.ml, open up the JavaScript console just like we've done in the past, and just paste each of these lines in, and take a look at the network pane after you run each one, and see like what you actually watch, what you actually requests you see being made, and take a look at it. So one other little trick I want to bring up, this button up here, this clear button, is really helpful. So if you have a bunch of data in here and you want to clear it, just click this and it'll all go away. And then if you make another request, it'll show up.
So Ryan
Yeah.
or Kelly or both. Obviously, we're running into these problems getting access. Are we supposed to try and like solve that, or what are we doing with?
No. So the to be clear, the exercise is run through those Axios commands and take a look in the network pane in Google Chrome and see what happens when you run each one of those. Really, the point is just to get you used to seeing those errors, and then seeing sort of looking in the network pane and seeing how those errors present themselves in that interface. Just the point here being like, I want to make sure that when you run into this in future modules, you can at least know, okay, this is a CORS thing, and you can know that like when you run into this problem, I need to include CORS in my search string when I'm trying to figure out how to solve this problem. So this is not meant to be like an exhaustive, complicated exercise, just getting you used to what things look like.
I'm a little confused about the provisional headers. It looks like it just put all this stuff in there except in content type. It just does that for you, or?
Yeah, so this is a good point. I didn't talk about this, but when a browser makes an HTTP request, there are some headers it includes by default. And accept and content type are some that are pre-populated with values. And when you specify headers, you're adding to that list and overriding ones that maybe they set by default. And that's why like there are a lot of those standard headers, like why they kind of exist, so the browser can send them for each request. Like user agent's an example of one of those.
So that's not just a CORS thing. That's I guess I just haven't looked at this very thoroughly before. That's any request.
That's any request.
Okay.
Like even when loading an HTML page, like you visit a URL, it's going to send those headers. Host header is another great example of that. Like, remember, if you don't send that and the server is hosting multiple web pages, it won't know which one to disambiguate. Like, it can't figure that out. So someone's got to send that. And like, even expanding on that further, like curl sends some default headers. It says the host header, it sends a user agent header. And curl's user agent is like curl, and that's it. It's like super short and sweet. Postman will send all those headers too. Like in general, if you send an HTTP request without headers, like that's a really weird request. Like they normally have like many headers.
Ryan, for some reason, my network pane is not looking like yours.
What browser are you in?
I'm in Chrome. Let's see here. Chrome 91.0. Yada yada yada.
Let's see here.
I don't know. Is it kind of like with Postman where there's like parts you have to pull down and move around, and I just don't have something showing, or
That could be. Actually share your screen real quick, because
yeah,
I
thank you.
use DevTools so often. I've made some modifications to it, and I kind of forget what the stock one looks like.
Because right now it's not like helping me, so I know I'm not seeing something. Okay. I can't start to share a screen because somebody else is
Oh,
sharing
yeah.
the screen.
There we
Fancy that. All right, hold on here. Where'd you go? There. All right, back to where we go here. There. And you guys out of the way.
So what you
And I had this was down here.
Yep. Okay.
So
So if you go over to console and you oh yeah, you pasted something there. Okay. Hit up and enter just to run it one more time. Oh, okay, we'll copy it and paste it, I guess.
Oh, the original request.
Yeah, just run it one more time just so I think I might know what's going on. I just want to verify.
Did I get it all? Yep.
Okay, now go over to the network pane. Very interesting.
Well, I'm getting more than I did. I'm getting, it looks like the traffic report on channel 10, the orange and the green.
Yeah, there's something some filtering turned on.
I want to preserve log, right?
That's not going to matter for this. Kelly, do
Okay,
you see
and
what's being
record.
there's some sort of filtering turned on somewhere? I'm trying to figure out what it is.
Oh, it's hot. That's why. Okay.
Yeah, when it's red, that means it's on, and I can't figure out what you filtered. Oh, blocked requests. I bet it's that thing up that checkbox box all the way on the right.
Yeah.
No,
Because I was, yeah, and it still wasn't. I just checked that to see if I would see anything more.
try okay, now it's green. I think or now it's blue. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well,
Go back over to the console, make your request again. Okay, now go back over to network. Still not showing up. It says 0 out of 4 in the corner there, so it's definitely seeing it.
where is that? It says that.
In the lower left-hand corner of DevTools, it says 0 out of 4 requests.
Yeah, I've got the zoom faces there. I see. Okay. Zoom is like being a pain. Okay.
Give this a try. Hit the little circle with a slash through it in the upper left-hand corner.
Mhm.
Now give it a try.
Copy and paste.
Actually, also reload the page and then give it a try.
Reload this page or the whole page?
Whole page. Okay, so stuff shows up in there now. Go over to console. And then run your request one more time. Go back over to network. Yeah, there we go.
That was weird.
That was weird. I think that block request thing might have required you to reload DevTools for it to actually.
Yeah, and that actually wasn't checked when I ran into this. I was just trying to like troubleshoot it.
Oh, huh.
So the issue was there. So I don't, yeah.
Yeah.
So now I just have to figure out what I'm looking at. Okay.
Yep.
So the style sheet, there's a lot of stuff here. And these are
Yeah.
all part of the request that was made.
So keep in mind, actually hit the circle with a slash through it again. And then reload your page. See all that stuff popped up in there?
Mhm.
Those are all the requests that are made when your page loads. So that first request is the request made to get the HTML. The second request is the request that the HTML makes to get the CSS. And then the third and fourth requests are requests that are made to get the Axios script. And the fifth request is a request to get a special font. And the sixth request is also something font related. The last request is something favicon related, but it didn't work, so it got a 404.
I've heard of favicon. What
All
is that?
All these requests here, they're not related to JavaScript. They're just made by the browser. But if you hit the little circle with a slash through it, it'll clear that, and then you can make another request and only see those the JavaScript requests.
So do I reload and go back and run the request, or can I like,
You can just go back over to the console
okay,
and then run your request again. Now go back over to network. It should be in there. Yeah, there we go. I don't know why that wasn't working before, but it seems to be working for you now.
so red or bright pink, depending on your screen, seems to be the color for errors, correct?
Red is the color for errors.
Yeah, because I noticed like a lot of times the JavaScript stuff, it doesn't look red. It kind of looks a little different, but along the same line. And then the next one is just telling me something, in this case, the status, which is what we do want, except that it failed.
Mhm.
Now, how do I see that it failed here?
Well, so you see the course, the pre-flight request, and you see the original request. So the original request is in red, and the pre-flight request is below it. You can see under initiator, it says pre-flight.
Okay.
So just
So-
take a look. Oh, go ahead.
So the bottom line happens first. And then the one on top of it was the response to that.
So the the bottom one happens first, and then it got back, the pre-flight request was successful. And then, the pre-flight request came back with 200, but it wasn't successful. And you can take a look at the error and see why. We just talked about that a second ago.
Mhm.
And because that wasn't successful, the original request just didn't complete. And you see status cores error there. That really makes it clear what's going on.
Right. So you make a request before your request.
Exactly.
And what you're basically doing is dipping your toes in the water, or, just checking to see if the fish might bite before you decide to go fish in there.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
So we never actually got around to making a real request because we got slapped down by it.
Yep.
Right?
Exactly.
Because I'm some hacker and the server knows that, right?
Yeah, the server does not allow you to make cross-origin requests to it.
Wow. And so there's no way to fix that if you're the person trying to reach out to another server.
Correct.
But if it happens to the server you're responsible for, you got a couple things that you're responsible for. I know we'll get into that later.
Yeah, we will get into it
Okay.
later, but the gist of it
Okay.
is, if you have control over the server, you can change what the server returns for that pre-flight request. So you can make it return something that will allow your browser that you want to be able to access it. Typically, web APIs, they will send back in the pre-flight request data that basically says anyone from any origin can make a request to me. So if you were to do the GitHub API example, you'd see something like that.
Okay.
You'd make it, the pre-flight back from GitHub would have a probably access control allow origin star, and that means anyone can make a request to this endpoint, make a request to this API.
Okay. Now you set up example.com, I presume, right?
I did not. Example.com is just a total.
It's just a thing that developers use to, okay. Because I was going to say, yeah, I'm sure you put serious safety on there. All right. So I'll try the next one. Thank you.
Yep. Speaking of, I got a request from someone to define this word endpoint I keep using. And I realized I never actually defined it before. So I'm going to do that. An endpoint is like a path on an API that you can access or you can communicate with. So for example, like yesterday, /cars is an endpoint. /cars/ID is an endpoint. It's kind of a word that just means the same sort of thing as path. It's just typically the word that's used when you're talking about like a REST API. This is kind of the fancy word they've picked. So I just kind of say it naturally and kind of slip up, and that's probably why you've been hearing me say it. But pretty much just means path. Okay, so how's everybody doing? Does everyone get a chance to take a look at this stuff at least somewhat? Cool. Seeing thumbs up? Seeing some yeses? I'm going to keep moving forward here. Now, also I want to mention, today's class is going to be short. It's kind of on purpose. I want to spend the last part of class answering questions, talking about the New York Times weekend exercise. So we've got one more kind of mini lesson to do, and then we're going to get to that. Okay. So next up, we're going to talk about caching. Have any of you heard the term caching before? Like maybe you've heard like clear your browser's cache or something like that. Well, caching is a technique that stores the result of a computation so that future requests for that computation's result can be provided faster. Okay, what does that mean? Well, imagine that you have something that is really slow to do. Like, let's say you've got a file in a filing cabinet that's across the room, and you need to use that file a lot. So you have to get up from your desk, you have to walk over to the filing cabinet, you got to open up the filing cabinet, you got to find the file, you got to pull it out, you got to bring it back over to your desk, and you got to have to look at it. That's like you can totally do that, like go through that process every single time you need to look at that file, but it's kind of slow. what might be better is if you could somehow take that file, and when you need to look it up, we need to get access to that file, instead of, once you've gotten it, instead of like going and putting it back in the cabinet, you could just put it on your desk. And then every single time you need it, you could just look at it on your desk and put it back down again. So caching is basically a technique where you take the information, you make a copy of it, and you put that copy in a place that's easier or quicker to access. And because it's easier or quicker to access, it means that it takes less time for something like a web page to load. And the web is built on caching. It is a pretty core foundational concept of the web. And without it, the web would be incredibly slow. Just think about this for a second. Images. Images aren't really the smallest kind of file. Like I mean, you can really compress images and make them tiny, but like good quality images are kind of large. And a lot of the icons you'll see on web applications and websites these days, they're good quality images. So that would, like, imagine every single one of those icons, the web browser had to talk all the way to the server, say like, please give me that icon. The server would have to return it every single time the page loads. Like, that is a really time-intensive process. So what happens instead is the web browser will kind of like save sort of like, just like on your desk, it'll keep track of all that information. It'll store it. It'll store it kind of locally. And then next time the web browser like asks for that information, it will, instead of actually going out to the server and getting that information, it'll check in this sort of local cache and it'll get it from there instead. So it makes things a lot faster. However, there's kind of a downside. We're going to talk about that in a second. But let's do a little exercise that kind of shows caching in practice. And here's a great example of another kind of caching. This is a kind of caching in JavaScript, but same sort of concept. I've got a function here called compute. It takes 2 parameters. And at the end of the day, really, I just want to divide those 2 values and return that result. So that's really all this function's doing. It's just dividing 2 numbers. But I've got some other things here to cache this information. So I've got this object up top. And then every single time I run this function, it will take my 2 input parameters and it'll put them together and make like a sort of a key. So it'll make like A/B. So like if A is 1 and B is 2, I'll get like 1/2. And it'll check to see if that exists in this object. And if it does, it'll just return that value. It'll skip all the computations, just return it right away. But if that value doesn't exist, it'll perform the computation, and then it'll store it into the cache. So effectively, this is what this code's doing is, it's like your desk is empty, and then the first time you need the file, you walk over to the file cabinet, and you grab the file out of the file cabinet, and you put it on your desk. And then every time you need that file again, you look on your desk for it instead of walking over to the file cabinet. So that's kind of, think of this cache object here as kind of like your desk in that analogy. So I'm going to put this over here in Developer Tools, and let's give this a try. So compute 1, 2, 1/2, 0.5 makes sense. Be like, I'll do 2, 3, 2. Also kind of makes sense. But let me take a look now at this cache. You can see that we have, like, we've generated these keys. They've been stored in the cache. All great. And it means now that anytime we want to perform this computation, we can just look up the value. We don't have to actually perform the computation. But there is a sort of downside to this. This is where we're getting at before we were talking about the browser. What happens if you want to change what this compute function does? Like, let's say you decide, actually, instead of dividing these numbers, I want to add them. So I'm going to redefine it there. And now I'm going to call compute 1, 2. I still get 0.5. 1 plus 2 isn't 0.5.
Yeah, the second line, const key equals, you still have a slash instead of,
Yes, I'm getting to that, Carolyn.
oh, sorry.
Um,
Sorry.
Now, what's going on here? Well, this key, I'm using a slash here. Yeah, let's disregard that for a second. But I'm computing a key based off of these two values, A and B, and then I'm looking up that value in the cache and returning the value. So because there is my key here, like, still exists, it's going to return that. It's not going to run the computation again. It's going to use the value in the cache. And this is the big sort of trade-off you have to make with the cache. This problem is called cache invalidation. And it is another one of these problems that is the bane of a software developer's existence. Caching makes things faster, but it comes with the trade-off that the data you're going to get is not always the most up-to-date version of the data. So in this case, if we were to invalidate this cache, like for example, let's say I were to delete cache 1/2, get rid of this key here, and now I rerun my compute function, it's going to be correct. And the reason it's going to be correct is that value doesn't exist in the cache. So now it doesn't find that value in the cache, so it actually recomputes it and stores it into the cache. And this sort of operation, deleting a thing from the cache, is called cache invalidation. On your computer for HTTP or for your browser, when you clear your cache, what you're doing is you're emptying all the values out of the cache and basically turning it into an empty object again. So it means that every single time you make a request to the server at that point, you're not using any cache data. So the first request of that site is going to be really slow because it's going to have to run these computations. But every request after that is going to be fast because it can just look in the cache. Does that make sense? Cool. I'm seeing some thumbs up, some head shaking, some yeses. I'm going to keep going. Yeah, so this is what I basically just did in the web browser, but written out so if anyone's following along separately, they can work through it. So as I said, caching is a common technique for HTTP requests. The browser keeps a cache and it stores any sort of a lot of different kinds of requests in that cache. So it stores a lot of like really anything you make a GET request to is cached, is kind of the secret. And that's coming back to APIs, like that's part of the reason why GETs are for reading things and not for updating things. Because imagine you wanted to update something with a GET, you'd make a GET request to do it, and it might be cached, and the browser might actually just use the cache value and not actually talk to the server and update that thing, not actually make a request to the server for real. It might just use the cache version. So GETs should always be requests that don't perform an actual action, that only return data for that reason. Now, yeah, I just said all this. Browsers want to avoid downloading big files like images or videos again and again. It's slow, so they cache them on the user's computer. And yes, GET requests are cached. So just like with cores, there's a whole rule set on how things are cached, and like exactly what is done. I'm not going to go into it. For the most part, a rule of thumb is that GETs are cached, but it is a little more complicated than that. So there are circumstances where you really don't want to cache. Imagine you're developing locally. You're like working on an app on your computer, and you save your code and you reload it in the browser. You want to see the latest version of that code, and you don't care if it's slow. You just saved it. You don't want to have to be debugging code that's like an hour old from like a previous version of what you're working on. You want to see the most up-to-date thing. And if you're not seeing the most up-to-date thing, it's going to be really, really confusing, and you're going to be spending hours trying to figure out what's going on. So in general, when you're doing local development, you really don't want to cache. You kind of want to disable the browser cache. I'm bringing this up mostly because this is a problem you might run into. And It is such a big problem that, in fact, there is a very famous quote in computer science called "The two hardest problems in computer science are cache invalidation and naming things." And they are not. This quote has been attributed to a lot of different people over the years. I think Phil Carlton was the first person to say it, but it is so true. So to break that down, cache invalidation, what we're talking about, like when do you know that the data you have is old? That sort of problem. And naming things, coming up with good names for variables, coming up with good names for like API endpoints. It seems like naming things, oh, come on, that's easy. It is not easy at all. Like, because what you think is a good name, other people probably can find very, very confusing. And people have different philosophies on this, and it turns into a whole thing. So this is a quote you're going to run into probably over and over and over. And actually, there's a alternate version of it that's kind of funny. The two hardest problems in computer science are cache invalidation, naming things, and off by one errors. And if some people might get that, some people might not. But yeah, anyway. So Karen asked, is that like in Postman where you can see all your previous entries? What are you referring to, the network pane, Karen, in DevTools?
Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
No, when you're in Postman.
Hello? Okay, sorry about that. I was getting some feedback. Still get some feedback. Oh well. Like when you're in Postman, if you go to the left side, there's a whole list of like everything that you've tried while you were there.
Exactly.
So that's what I was thinking of.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's with if you see that list of everything you've tried, it's the same thing. It's just instead of it being in Postman, it's in the web browser. It's every request the web browser's made. And so that could be a request to get the HTML for the page. That could be a request to get a style sheet. That could be a request that you made in the JavaScript console. That could be like a request you made with Axios. It's every single request the page has made since it loaded. And this is an incredibly useful debugging tool. Okay, so there's two ways I'm going to talk about to clear the cache here. And these are ways that if you're in a situation where you are not sure if you're seeing new or old data, like you're not sure if the browser is caching it and keeping it around, these are two tricks or two things that you should know that you can use to try to fix that problem. And the first one I use multiple times a day. If you have DevTools open in Chrome and you click on hover over the reload button and then right click on it, you'll see this drop down menu here where you can select normal reload, hard reload, and empty cache and hard reload. If you select empty cache and hard reload, it's going to reload the page and basically remove all the caching just for that page. So clear the cache for only that page. And it's incredibly, incredibly handy. And you can see how long it took for that page to load when it wasn't cached. Like that was pretty long. And I'm not on a bad internet connection like here. So caching makes a massive difference. So that's thing one. And you'll note that it doesn't work unless you have DevTools open. So you can try to right click on the reload button, but it's not going to work unless you have DevTools open first, and then you right click and go to empty cache and hard reload. So the order of operations there is very important. And to say it again, that's if you're not sure you're seeing the latest data, that's a way you can be sure you're seeing the latest data. The second thing is the cache control header. So there's a header that the server can send, that can be sent, that basically like tells the client how exactly it should cache the data it's receiving. So the server can send a cache control header of this value no cache. And that'll basically tell the browser, do not cache this request. Always make it to me, the server, directly. Alternatively, you can also set a value like max age, and it'll basically say these items in the cache are valid for this amount of time. And this is another common strategy for cache invalidation. Like if you have a cache, you can say after 10 seconds, clear an item out of the cache. And that kind of ensures you have like data kind of rotating through the cache, that your cache doesn't get really stale and old. And that is the real term, a stale cache. So in general, though, like cache control, if you're working on the server and you want to ensure the requests you're making all are never being cached by the browser, this is a way you can do it. This is a standard header built into browsers for like essentially the beginning of the web. Like it's been around for a very long time. So while we're talking about caching, I should mention servers can also cache things too. We're not going to talk about this in this module, but caching is just really a strategy in software. And there's a lot of different ways you can do it, like in ways you can implement that strategy. HTTP implements a version of caching in the web browser. Our example we did in JavaScript with that function that stored the things into the cache object. That's another implementation of caching. But there are ways you can do it on the server too. So don't think of it kind of similarly to how you might think of an API and web APIs, where API is a sort of big thing, and a web API is like a category within an API, or it's like a kind of API. Caching is kind of this big thing, and then caching on the web is a thing, and maybe like caching in JavaScript is a thing, and maybe caching on the server side is a thing. They're all caching. It's just different ways of implementing that central like philosophy of caching. Okay, so again, this is another kind of quick little lesson here where I didn't really go into much super concrete, so I wanted to give you a takeaway. Caching makes the internet faster, but sometimes it can result in old data being shown in your browser. If your browser shows old data, you should try clearing the cache. That's really what you should take away from this. The extra little bits of information are just there in case you're curious, but like, you should know caching is a thing on the internet. Okay, so those are really the two things I wanted to cover today as far as like direct teaching, lecturing sort of stuff. We're coming up here on 7, and we normally take a break around now. So I'm thinking let's take our break now, and then at 7, let's get into talking about the weekend project and just answering any questions any people might have. Sounds good?
Real quick, sorry, real
Oh,
quick
yeah.
before we do that, Kyle had a question in the chat.
The network tab of the Chrome console also has a checkbox for disable cache. Is that another option you could use to check that box? That seems like that would work. I will say I've actually never done that before, but it seems like that would work. Let's see. In here maybe? Where are you seeing that out of curiosity?
I'm under the network tab, not the console.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, right at the top
Right
there.
there. Yeah, let's see. Yeah, that looks like that works too. Nice. Okay, so that's another way you can do it. In general, this is a pervasive enough problem. There's a lot of different ways people have tried to solve it. A lot of different ways people prefer to do it. So whatever works for you. Okay, we will get back at 7 then. See you soon. think I'm about ready to get started again. Still see a lot of people off camera though, so I'm not sure if everyone's back yet. I think I'm probably just gonna get going. There's not really, we're not doing instruction. We're just gonna be talking about an exercise, so not much to miss. Okay. Oh, signed out. Fun. Um, so we're going to talk about the New York Times exercise I keep bringing up, because that's going to be your project this weekend. That's kind of your last sort of assignment as part of this module. And it kind of brings together a lot of the pieces that we've talked about all throughout the module, kind of from the beginning, HTTP, all the way through Axios, headers, REST APIs. Basically, I'm going to show it again. Your goal is going to be to make something kind of like this. It doesn't have to look quite this pretty, but I kind of went a little crazy with it. But effectively, what this is a website that when I load it, it makes a request to the New York Times API, and it gets back a bunch of JSON containing like a bunch of books. And each entry has like a cover. It has a title, an author, and a link to go get more info on Amazon. I'm rendering that to the screen. And how you do it is completely up to you. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in a second. But like in general, the project is get data from the server, from the New York Times server, and render to the screen somehow. It could be, if you really want to make it as simple as possible, you could just print the literal JSON on the screen and that would be fine. But like, come on, that's no fun. Like, make it look a little bit interesting. So I think I sent it. Cool. So this exercise is pretty short here. Because the reason why it's pretty short is because a lot of this exercise is more about using the New York Times API than it is actually rendering the thing to the screen, because you've kind of already pretty much done that. Like, you've made an HTML page, you've put the Axios script tag in there, you've put a script tag below it, you've written Axios calls. The thing that we're going to be talking about really for this is the New York Times API. So in particular, this is the endpoint that you're going to be using. And I've pulled out the endpoint for you. I'm not going to make you dive through and dig through documentation. But I am going to, really the assignment is like, here's some documentation. Figure out how to make this request. Here's what the response kind of looks like. And you can see like things reminiscent of what I had in there. Like I had an author. I had like a title. And they have all the fields enumerated down here. They even have the thing over here where you can theoretically try the API, like see how it works. So that's kind of cool. You can maybe play around with that. But one thing to point out is there's no curl on this. So you can't just use the technique we did last time where you just find the curl and run that. So this is going to be a little bit more challenging. And it's going to be some trial and error. So that's really what the exercise is about. Figure out the API and then make a request to it with Axios and render something on the screen. Okay. Before we kind of dive off into that, though, I'm going to help you through the first part of this, which is get a token. You're going to need a token to work with this API. And there is, where is it? I guess I don't have it open. we're lucky that it kind of got like a step-by-step walkthrough. They tell you exactly how to make your own key or token or what they call an API key. So I'm going to post this in oh, Kelly's got it already. So I'd like everyone to go through this process, make a New York Times developer account, and then go through this step by step and create a token. And once you get that far, you should have something that looks kind of like this. So Susan says, I have a subscriber account. Does this need to be different from that? I'm pretty sure it does. Yeah. I think New York Times developer is like a very like a sub account or like a different thing. Also remember, you're going to be generating a token here, and tokens, you treat them like a password. It's kind of a private thing, only for you. Don't post it in Slack. Don't send an email to someone with it, etc. Now, when you have to pick which API you want, you're going to want the Books API, I believe. Yeah, Books API. It's going to give you this big list of APIs, and you want to enable the Books one. So Latonia asked a question. She said she pulled the documentation for the site, but it's a .yaml file. I'm not exactly sure what you pulled, but you asked what one of those files is. YAML is a file format very similar to JSON. It's like for encoding data. Okay, you want to hear something funny? It has the absolutely worst name ever. YAML stands for YAML ain't markup language. So the first letter in YAML, Y, stands for the acronym. So it's like a recursive acronym. Developers think they're so clever. It's like if you're ever on 81 and you're like heading north and there's that sign that says DTS trucking service, it's like that. If anyone knows what I'm talking about. It's DTS trucking service stands for DTS trucking service. Bugs the heck out of me.
Ryan, I'm sorry. I feel like this is sending me in a loop. What am I supposed to be doing? Like I signed in, but it says to sign in, but I'm signed in.
Okay.
Or I thought I was. I don't know what's happening here.
You should be able to do is if you sign in, you should get a thing that like up here where you've got it says you're signed in with an account. You see that?
No, it's doing weird things. When I clicked, now I am. Now I'm signed in. Yeah, that's weird.
Okay. I will say, playing around with their developer portal here, it just seems like it was quickly made and kind of shoddily put together. So
Well, even when I had to verify my link in email, I clicked it, it said it was expired. And then I sent another one and then it said I'm already verified. Like,
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
gotta know, oh, something went amiss when I tried to click on the link in my verify email.
yeah, yeah.
So I don't know what the deal is.
So now I want to get started and sign up for an API key. Is that correct?
so you want to go through register app. So if you go up here, you go to apps, go to new app, and you kind of walk through what they say you got to do. Pick a name, pick a description. Doesn't really matter what those are. And then, as I said, for the API, you want to pick the books API and then create it.
Sorry, where is that under? I can't look at my screen and look at yours at the same time.
Sorry. If you go up here and you go to apps,
Oh, under my name.
yep. Yeah, they call it the user menu. You go to apps.
I'm doing a new app.
Yep, new app. Call it whatever you want. I called mine like careers in code example or something. And then you want to select the books API. You want to enable that and click create.
Okay.
Tony, I realize I never actually answered your question. Like, why is the documentation for the site a YAML file? I'm not exactly sure, but there are some ways that people document APIs that are in like machine readable formats. So you might have gotten one of those. If you send it to me in Slack, I can take a look and tell you for sure.
So I'm at the pick an API page or whatever. What is it I should be doing? Do I make up one or?
You're on this page I'm currently looking at here.
Let's see here. I'm back. Let's see, did I click on? I have a bunch of, they're like tiles that have all the different APIs, most popular, semantic.
Okay,
It's not
so-
like a list. Oh, it's the same thing you have it? No, it's not.
Go to the upper right hand corner of your page where it has your logged in user.
Okay, I gotta go back a page, I think. Get started. I already signed in. It says. This thing is kludgy. I am on a different page than you, and it looks that it's got graphics on it.
You're probably like here.
Yeah, it's exactly where I am, yes.
Yep. Go to the upper right hand corner.
I'm not seeing anything up there.
Does it say sign in or does it say
It says sign
User-
in, but I already did.
try signing in one more time? It's a little clumsy. Like it has some weirdness going on.
Oh, yeah. Okay, now it shows me. All right, I'm there. All
Okay.
right, so click on me.
Yep. Go to apps,
There we go.
go to new app, and then put in a name and description, and then select the books API. It's very important. Books API, and then click create.
Okay, and I can call it whatever I want.
Call it whatever you want.
And then books API, that would just be like uppercase B and regular word books and then just API after it.
Oh no, I mean you can call it whatever you want, but in the API section below, there's a bunch of different APIs you can choose. You need to pick the books API. You need to enable it.
Gotcha, because it's got the description. Okay, got it. So the app name.
So I'm gonna go through these steps with you folks here. You click create, Flavelia. So she asked, how do I save to enable? Yeah, this thing is, a designer didn't work on this. Like, it really mean you need to click create to make it happen, I think. Oh, I got to select an API. That would do it. Yeah. So again, I'm very conscious. I'm showing this on a YouTube stream, but I don't really care about this token. This account is not attached to anything really I care about. So hack me. I dare you.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So this is the thing you want, this value here. So take this, put it somewhere safe, put it in a text file somewhere on your computer. You're going to need it as part of this exercise. So at this point,
I'm sorry, Ryan, after we enable, what happens?
click create. Oh, where is it? There it is. It should say a create down in the lower right-hand corner down here. It's like a gray button with a little floppy disk icon. So Dominique asked, you want the key and not the ID, correct? Yes, you want this value. You do not want this value. You want this one, the key. Now, while we're on this page, I can kind of show you typically how these sorts of web portals work. You typically can give yourself, you can make a number of tokens. So if you want to make like 5 tokens, you want to put one on each application you make, you can do that. And then you can do what's called revoking a token. And what that pretty much just means is like make this token no longer valid. So like, let's say you accidentally leak this token online and now it's like no longer secret. You can click revoke. And then now that token can no longer be used to make requests on your behalf. You have to make a new one. So typically that's sort of like how this goes. You make tokens, when you no longer need them anymore, you revoke them. So this is pretty typical of one of these sort of web portals to make tokens and manage them. So from this point on, pretty much all you folks. Of course, Kelly and I are here for questions, but really the task for the rest of the class, unless anyone has any unrelated questions for me or Kelly, is going to be to work on this exercise to try to get this request to work. It's going to be a lot of trial and error. You're going to have questions, you're going to run into things, but that's how you learn this stuff. So I will say, giving you a hint, playing around with this try this API thing is a good place to start. In particular, a real hint, if you click try this API, the web browser's got to make a request to try the API. And there's a place where we were looking to see requests that the web browser makes. Hint, hint, hint. So
So my site actually still works. I just checked, like my key's still active. I can share a link if you want to take a look at what I did for the site.
oh, you made one too?
Well, I made one in 2019
for
for homework.
Cohort 1.
Like I'm talking about like my assignment.
Oh,
Yeah,
cool.
it
Yeah,
actually
definitely.
still works. Like it's not beautiful. It is my 2019 assignment, but I will show it to you and like send you the link. So if you want to see like one of the students' results.
Yeah, actually, that's something else I wanted to mention. I taught pretty much the exact same thing to Cohort 1, like the same slides and like the same thing. Like I adapted a little bit for being remote, but if you want to see like the same content but like slightly differently presented, all the videos for Cohort 1 are up on YouTube, and you can look at them and walk through them there too if you want to see it like in a different bit of a different style. So Oh wow, I gotta see this thing. Oh, nice.
Yeah,
I
it's
think
not rad.
I like it. I like it.
Thanks. This is what I turned in 2 years ago.
Yeah, this is good.
Looking at it, there are definitely things I would do differently now. But again, I took this class 2 years ago, so that's an additional like 2 years of web dev on top of that. So this
That
is
is-
what I did when I was taking this class.
I'm really impressed. This looks like a library page, you know, like Marcellus Library or something, how they push their books, or like Goodreads. This is nice. I'll just take this and we'll be good.
Thanks.
That was awesome.
Oh, you did some Flexbox.
Oh, also, I
Nice.
should probably note, if you're going to look at the code for this, I'm using Fetch and not Axios. So when
Yeah.
Ryan taught this lesson 2 years ago, we used like a slightly different way of formatting our requests. So if you look at it and you don't see Axios in the code, that's why.
Good call out.
Also, I feel like I should mention, like, this took me all weekend. It took me a lot of CORS errors to get this done, a lot of looking up stuff online. I believe I cried to my boyfriend at one point. So like this, you know, I didn't just like sit down in 2 hours and code this 2 years ago. Like this took time and effort and work to get done. So if this is like weird or hard or frustrating, you know, I sympathize. It is difficult.
Yeah, there's a reason why it's the weekend project, the end project for this whole class. Alina asked, where did you find the try the API page? So I went to the, I lost it here. I went to the assignment. And in the assignment, I gave you a link to the documentation for the endpoint you need to use to complete this assignment. So I'm not forcing you to have to look through and find the actual endpoint. I'm giving you the endpoint you need to use. Just I did that because this documentation is a little bit cumbersome to work with. But once you're actually on this page, you can play around with it. So Susan also asked, is this really going to take hours? I mean, I would say it'll take as much time as you really want to put into it. There's like a minimum version of this you could probably crank out quickly. But like part of the point of this exercise is like, have some fun. Like try to put some styling in there. Like you took a bunch of weeks of class on how to make pretty CSS and HTML. Like try to make that happen for this. Like make it kind of fun.
Yep, that's just exactly what I was going to say in answer to that question. Like, is it really going to take hours? I mean, I agree with Ryan. It's going to take as long as you want it to take with it. You could absolutely do this assignment quicker than I did. You don't have to do like all the stuff that's here. If you just return the JSON, you have successfully completed the assignment. So don't feel like you can do this if you want to, if you're having fun, if you want to make it look nice and practice your CSS skills, absolutely go for it. But also, if you don't have the time to do that, don't feel like you haven't done a good job.
Alina asked what time is office hours this weekend. I was gonna do the same time that I did last time, like 11 a.m. on Saturday. If that doesn't work for folks, we can flip it around or change it up. But yeah, Saturday at 11 a.m. Cool. Okay. It's the same call.
They,
The cheese, 3 cheese.
oh, do we have any marinara sauce or whatever? Oh,
Caroline, I'm gonna mute you.
I've known AJ Styles a very long time, and the one thing that I've learned is that you never, ever.
So Fabila asked, do I click on the API keys icon? Are you still setting up the token? Okay. So what you need to do,
Yes.
you want to go to apps, new app, enter a name. Oh, wait, I'm not sharing my screen. That would be helpful. Let me do that again. Let me do that again here. You want to go up to apps, new app, enter the name, enter the description. It can be whatever you want.
I did
then-
that.
Under APIs, go to Books API and click Enable,
Okay.
and then click Create.
I did that.
Okay. So once you've done that, I think be brought back to this page. You've got a list of apps, and the one you just created should be there.
Ooh.
Once you click on one, you should be able to get into this page. You'll see your API key right there.
Okay, I see the API keys. So just click on that little square.
Yep, you can click on this, or you can just select this and copy it to your clipboard, whatever works. Or
Oh, okay.
put it wherever you want. Just save it, keep it secret. That's what's important. Make sense?
I'll let you know in a minute.
Okay.
Okay, and it says to save. Bottom right-hand corner.
You don't have to click that. You've already created it. You're on like a page where you can edit the details about it right now. So if you click save, it'll like edit those details and you can save the state of it. But you've already created that key, so you don't have to click save if you don't want to.
Okay. So I'm all set.
You're all set.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Yep. So a few people have asked, they've gotten a message, something along the lines of like, published date does not match pattern. And I've been kind of asking what's going on with that. Well, I'm going to tell you, if you're getting that sort of error, I'll tell you where you should clue in on the page. I'm not going to give you the full answer. I want you to figure this out on your own. But look at this section right here. It says query parameters. Read through this, especially this part right here. And see if after reading that, you can understand what you need to put or what you don't need to put in that box. Brandy asked, once I have the API key, will I need to input it anywhere in my code? You will eventually. So if you remember, typically an API key or a token, it's used to make sure the request is coming from like the person that said that this server thinks it's coming from. So at some point, you're going to need to include that in your request to tell the server that you're making the request. Because the New York Times, their API, and I'm just giving this for context, they require a token to be included in every request that goes to their API. And the reason why is because they've got rate limiting set up. So if you, in other words, they only want you to make so many requests. They don't want people to make infinite numbers of requests to their servers. So the idea is if you have a token, every single time someone makes a request with that token, you can sort of like increment a counter. And once that counter gives it above a certain threshold, you can cut off access to them. Yeah, and Kelly says you definitely will when you make your request with Axios, definitely, yeah. I will say one hint is that try the API thing. If you're going down that road, that should be able to give you, put a token in your request automatically, or more accurately, you need to be able to, you can configure it to put a token in your request. And the interface is a little clunky and you might have to click around a little bit, but there's a way to do it. So.
Are we just supposed to be guessing? Or I'm like, I just put in something and it says it doesn't match pattern, but I don't understand what their pattern is.
Take a look at that section I told you to read, in particular the first line of it.
Oh, I see. I guess. Well, I have something like that in there and it still says I don't match the pattern. Let me try again. No.
Can you put a screenshot in student pasted code?
Sure.
The other thing I want to point out is the last section of that description. It says something along the lines of, if you do not include a published date, the current week's bestsellers list will be returned. So Brandy asked, so do I trash it when I'm done? Kelly mentioned leaving it out when pushing code. I might have interpreted that wrong. In general, you don't want to push tokens to GitHub or like put them online just like publicly. I'd say for this exercise, it's not all that big of a deal because this token can't really do anything. Like this is kind of more of a throwaway account. You're probably not going to use the New York Times API again for something. So like it's not that big of a deal. If you were to look at Kelly or my pages, if you look at the JavaScript, our tokens are embedded in the page. So that's just going to be what it's going to be for this exercise. But especially like yesterday with that GitHub token, that's a lot more important because that GitHub token has real permissions. Like it can do real things. It can like really act on your behalf on GitHub. And GitHub is like an account that I'm guessing, probably care about a lot more than this random New York Times thing. So it's really sort of a risk assessment you have to make for yourself. Like the question you have to ask yourself is would I be willing to post the password for this site publicly? Would it really matter to me? If the answer is like it would matter, don't put a token out there. If the answer is like, nah, it wouldn't really, then it's probably not a big deal, but it's usually an anti-pattern, just like stick tokens out there. Like, does that answer your question? Cool. So Latonia put a message in Slack and asked, what does the attached error message mean? And it says something like, failed to resolve API key variable request.queryparam.api-key. That seems like kind of a scary message. I would just read through it, try to understand what it's saying. The word query param, or query param is another word for query string. Think about what that's talking about, but also just like realize up top, it's a 401 unauthorized, and you can look up what that means, but 4 starts with the 4, it means it's your fault, or it's the requester's fault, the client's fault. They're not sending the data they should send. And 401 unauthorized, if you look it up, it'll say something along the lines of, you didn't specify a token. So just based on that status code, you can probably guess what's going on is you didn't include a token, or you didn't authorize yourself.
Yeah, but I guess I'm confused. So once we got the token, we had to authorize it. Is that what that button is for? Because I put the key on there and it's just not taking it.
Try refreshing your page. It's a little crafty, this tool.
Okay.
So Susan, I think you're taking this a bit too literally. Let me share my screen here.
Well, they say it doesn't match the string.
It says this. Now,
yeah, and I did it the other way, just year, month, day, and it doesn't work that way either.
So you did
without
it like,
any of that.
Like you put like this literally in, or you put like a year, then a month, then a
I
day?
literally put YMD, but like 2021 05 30.
Like this.
Yes. Yes.
And then you clicked execute.
Yeah.
Well, okay, it's gonna work for me because I did some other stuff. But like you got an error when you saw that happen.
Yeah.
You got something probably like this.
Yeah.
So this is what Latonia asked. It says 401 unauthorized. 4 means the client somehow screwed up. The client sent the wrong information to the server. That's what the 4 means. 401, the status code, you can look it up online, but in general, it means you didn't specify a token when you made this request. Like you're not authorized. You need to be authorized, but you're not authorized.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm the client in this scenario.
You are the client.
Okay.
So behind the scenes, when you click execute, my guess, and this is actually how it works, but like you click execute and it probably makes a request with the browser to the server, and then it comes back again and gives you a response back. So like it's kind of as if when you click execute, the web page is like making that Axios request for you and showing you the response here on the page. And like it's doing that for you, but you somehow like it's giving you back a 401 unauthorized, which means it's somehow not configured right to get your token into this request. Like you somehow need to like authorize the request.
Oh,
And that's vague on purpose. Like this is how it typically goes, where you don't really know exactly what you have to do, and you got to click around and just like try a bunch of buttons, look for things, and eventually maybe you'll stumble across something that's like, oh, this seems about right. So I would just say like start exploring, looking around. That's really the next step. And like it is a little bit cumbersome, but that's typically how this sort of goes when you're doing this sort of exercise, working with a new API, trying to learn the documentation, understand how the examples work.
okay.
I want to quickly address Dominique, the comment you made. I know you said never mind, but I just think it's worth pointing out. The way this exercise started is making HTML and CSS and JavaScript. That's totally a fine place to start. I just kind of mentioned the API documentation, and basically you're going to have to make the HTML page that actually makes this request, and you can either do that at the beginning, or you can play around with the API and get the API figured out. And then once you've got the API figured out, you can make the request. You can make the HTML page and you can add your request into it. So really the order in which you do this doesn't matter. I will say the harder of the two things is definitely figuring out the API, which I think that's why a lot of people kind of ended up starting there. But the order doesn't really matter. So Susan asked, where are we supposed to be testing to see if we found it? In the try this API or somewhere else? Yeah, I mean, the try the API is the I mean, it seems like on the page, that's the thing you use to test the API. So yeah, that's a good assumption. So Susan says, I'm confused. I'm only supposed to be using this little box to figure out how to get the list. There are some other buttons on the page just in that little box. Particular, take a look maybe above, up top. Okay, we found that part. Post a screenshot and student pasted code, Susan.
Sorry, yeah, I found all that, but like, I don't understand what to do after that. I don't know where to put that to see if that works, I guess. Like, I guess I just can't deal with no instructions. I just can't. I don't think this way.
Can you put a screenshot and student pasted code? I think if I can see what you're running into, I get the feeling you're really close.
Sure. Oops, hold on.
Kyle, so you were asked, you typed up a long question. I think the gist of your problem is in Axios is a third-party library. So any sort of environment you want to use it in, you've got to include a script tag in that page that brings in Axios. If you just go to a random page and type like axios.get, Axios isn't going to be defined. The only way it's going to be defined is if you include that third-party library. So that's why I've been having all the Axios exercises, why I've been doing them on, or you've been doing them on the module5.ml site, because that includes the Axios library, so you don't have to worry about that complexity. But if you write your own page, you have to do that.
I'm in the console on the New York Times page.
The JavaScript console?
Yeah, and that's where I was earlier today when I was trying to do the Star Wars one. I was doing it on their page.
Yeah, and the problem is that the New York Times page doesn't include the Axios library. In the HTML that gets returned back from the server, there's not a script tag that includes Axios.
Okay, so I should be doing it on my own index page in the JavaScript console then.
Yeah, let me actually, let me show you exactly what I'm talking about. 'Cause I think it's going to be helpful for others too.
Yeah.
So if I go over to module5.ml, I open up the dev tools, I go to elements, you can see that in there I've got the script tag here. And that's just part of the source code for the page. Like, go over here and see it too. We're like, this is just part of the source code for that page. It's included whenever it loads. And this source here is this big, long, nasty thing. And this is Axios. So if you go to like example.com or something else, and you try to do something with Axios, it's not going to be defined because there's no script tag on this page to include Axios. Does that make sense?
Okay, so that was my first error. So it wasn't about quotes. It was about the fact that there's no script tag in the first place.
Yeah, and I think your second error was a consequence of the first. Like you ran something and that maybe resulted in like a syntax error or something resulted in that promise not actually being set to a value and it was undefined. And then you tried to do like .then on it and yeah.
Okay, so I was probably mixing it up with the quotes error that I had.
Yeah.
Okay, so I should be doing this in my own HTML file, not on their website. That's the gist of it.
So I would say either the two places you can make Axios requests easily are going to be on module5.ml because I included that script tag, or you can write your own HTML file that, sorry, Zoom's making this hard here.
Yeah, I've got that set up with the link, like you said to do in the instructions.
Yeah, I mean, if you put this in your own HTML file, then every script tag after the script tag, you can use Axios just fine.
Okay.
It's just like the bootstrap JavaScript, where you've got to include it as part of it's a library.
Okay, so I should be doing it on my own HTML page then. Good. Just one little minor question. You have your script tag inside the body, and you mentioned that in the instructions. And I thought before Max was having us put it between the end of the body and the end of the HTML. Does that matter? Or
I saw I was having you do that too, and I wasn't sure if that was something you were saying purposefully or what. The way I've always been taught is you always put script tags at the bottom of the body. In practice, I don't think it really matters.
Okay.
Just the important thing is that your Axios script tag is above your script tag where you're writing your code.
Okay.
Like that ordering, if you have that ordering wrong, your code's going to run and then Axios is going to load.
Okay.
And that's not going to work.
Got it. Thanks.
Yep. So we're after 8:30 here. So there's really no reason you got to stick on.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Kyle just brought it to mind. I'm putting together the HTML part now. In the scripts, I'm deciding to put Bootstrap in because I might want it. And then I have the Axios link that you had us put in. And then of course, there'll be the one where we do the Axios call. So I just put that URL in now just to hold that place. So just regular JavaScript. where should it go in that scheme in terms of the order?
You're talking about the script tag.
Mhm.
So in regular, if you're making a new HTML page, you want to put the Axios script tag, and then you want to put another script tag where you put your code. So it's really important the Axios script tag goes before your code.
Right, so you've got the Axios, and then there's the one where we're gonna send a request to that URL you included in the instructions.
Mhm.
So when you're talking about your code, that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, the code
Or
I'm talking
they-
about is your Axios request. Like,
Okay.
so there's
So-
two. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yeah, so the main Axios script below that is the one where you're making a request. But before those, I have the Bootstrap bundle.
Yeah, so this is an interesting question. Like, if you wanted to include the Bootstrap JavaScript, the Axios JavaScript, and your own custom JavaScript, what order do you put all those in?
That's my question.
Okay, that's your question. So the answer is, if you're managing all your dependencies with script tag, which is the only way you know how to do it now. So like, I guess this is just the answer, but in the next module, you're going to learn a new way to do this. If you're managing all your dependencies with script tags, you need to put them in the order so that any script above another script doesn't. How do I say this? A script tag, all of the dependencies of a script should be above that script.
Mhm.
So the first script should have no external dependencies. And the next script should have no external dependencies except for maybe the thing in the first script tag. And effectively, what you're doing there is you're picking the order in which they load so that everything, anything that a script depends on is loaded first before the thing that needs it.
Right, and it's kind of like style sheets, the order matters. So I would put Bootstrap, I would put the two Axios scripts. And then I would put just plain old script.js after that.
You should only have to do one Axios script.
Well, there's the one with the unpackaged one.
Yep.
Axios, and then there's the one for now I just put the URL in the script tag so it's there, but the one where we're going to do the GET request and put the Axios request in there.
Yeah, okay, I see. So
and
yeah,
then just the JScript one?
You could do it that way. The other way you could do it is you could put that Axios code into your last script tag, into your external script.js one. So at a minimum, you need to have 3 script tags. And you can have more than that if you want. But at a minimum, if you're going to have Bootstrap on your page, you've got to have Bootstrap, Axios, and the order of those doesn't really matter because they don't depend on each other. So you could do Axios, Bootstrap, Bootstrap, Axios, but you need to have those 2 up top. And then at the bottom, you've got to have at least one more script after those. And that you could have like one script that makes the Axios request and another script that does other things. You could have one script that does everything. You could split up into like 5 scripts if you wanted to. You could put like one script in the page. You could have one be an external file. You can mix and match them however you want. But
or you might not even use it, but it's there in case you want to.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, really the important thing is that the scripts that are any script that is depended on by later scripts are in the order such that the scripts that are loaded first. What am I trying to say?
Yeah, well, you said depended on.
Yeah, so, depended on. That's
Bootstrap's the Papa Bear, and he sets the rules, and then this Axios dude comes in and he says, okay, that's well and good, Bootstrap, but I don't like this, this, and this, so I'm gonna do this, this, and this. But he couldn't say that if he was before Bootstrap, because Bootstrap would step on him.
Exactly.
Just like with style sheets, it's like,
yep.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was wondering. So I'm on the right track. So Bootstrap, then the 2 Axios puppies there, and the regular script.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Can I ask one more quick follow-up question about what I was asking about before?
Yeah,
so the homework for last night that I'm not quite finished with yet, the Star Wars part of it, So I should be running that on your module 5.ml website,
Okay,
except
so-
that I'm gonna get CORS errors, which I don't think you would have asked us to do that before we learned about it tonight.
Yeah, so if you, as an academic exercise, try making a request to one of those Star Wars API endpoints, and you'll see it actually does CORS behind the scenes for you. So that Star Wars API returns the proper options, like it receives option requests and returns them. So yesterday, if you did that Star Wars API exercise with Axios, you were making cross-origin requests, you just didn't know what that meant yet.
Aha.
And
Okay.
I very carefully chose that API so this wouldn't be a problem. I've like very carefully picked all the exercises so we didn't have to talk about cross-origin stuff until the very end.
Well, my problem is I actually ran into that problem with some other exercise. I don't remember what it was, but I remember posting in the chat toward the end of class, like I finally got Axios to work, but I didn't realize I had to be on the module 5 website in order to do it. And so right away, when I saw that Star Wars thing, I was like, okay, I need to not have the problem I was having before. I need to go on the Star Wars website before I do it. And then that's why I was having all those problems. So
You get
Yeah.
busy. Is there like, good old days of top 40 hits and I don't know if you remember those days, Casey Kasem and everything, but anyway, is there like the best of New York Times bestseller APIs that you can go to that people have compiled so you don't have to like search and find one that'll accept your stuff?
No, that's kind of the thing. Yeah, like you might, sometimes you can get lucky and you can be like, well, like I know maybe like if someone says certain things, I'll be like, oh, this is the API I'm going to go to because I've used it before. Like, let's say you wanted an API where like you can send the API a request and they'll send a text message for you. Like, because there's not really a way you can send a text message in a web browser. So there's a really great API called Twilio that'll do that for you. I just know that because I've been around the block a few times. So if, and they've got it like
that somewhere. Yeah. Okay.
and they've got like a good API. So if I'm going to do that, if I'm going to need to make a text message happen, I'm going to think, oh, I'm going to use Twilio. So this is like the reason why I'm kind of dumping all you in the deep end. Like that's a very purposeful decision. Like this is
I feel it.
yeah, like the
I
sort
feel
of like struggles you're going through right now is
Oh.
how it is. Like you never really fully understand how things work. You're always in a constant state of like slight confusion.
Sounds
And
like philosophy major.
you're always kind of like doing little science experiments to prove to yourself like something works. Like you're testing something and then you're changing one variable and you're testing it again. And it's like, well, that changed a thing. Let me try the original thing again. And there's really no other way to figure this stuff out than that. I mean, the other way is someone just walk you through step by step, but you're not going to learn it that way. So like,
And you're
I
not going
could,
to do that on the job.
yeah, you're not going to do that on the job. Like I could
Supposedly. No,
share my screen and go through each of these step by step. And we did a little bit of that yesterday. And I think
that was
helpful.
very helpful. But yeah.
At the end of the day, these exercises, you need to be at the point where you're going to struggle through them.
Oh, yeah.
But like the only way to get better is by struggling. And like a lot of this stuff, maybe like not stuff necessarily at this direct level, but I go through this exact same process at work every day. And maybe it's about like different things, but I encounter a problem and I'm like, I have no idea how this works. And then my next step is I have to just like read a bunch of documentation, spend like an hour, absorb all the information I can. And then I'm like, okay, maybe that means I can try a thing now. And I try a thing that totally blows up. And I say, okay, let's maybe read some more documentation. And eventually, through just pure brute force, I eventually figure it out. And it's like, oh, wow, okay, that was actually easier than I thought. And then I file out
that's
away
the thing. It's the JavaScript's like that. It's like, it looks like, what the hell is this? You know, it's not basic. But then you start to get in the groove and it's like, oh, it's like a culture. It's like,
yeah,
I'm with this little JavaScript cult now and I get how things are done. Now it makes a lot of sense to me, but it's like that first part, you're like, what?
yeah. I mean, what'll end up happening, of course, over time, you'll start to, there are certain things you'll just get good at doing those certain steps over and over and over. And what'll eventually start to happen is like, the sort of level of problems you end up attacking kind of becomes more and more abstract. We're like, I mean, I've been doing this for like over 10 years. I don't really like worry about syntax anymore. I mean, occasionally I will for like weird things like once a month or something, but it's not something I think about actively anymore. Like the problems I'm working on, I'm attacking them in the same sort of way. They're just higher level problems. Like let's see, like what's an example of when I did today at work to give you like an interesting one. Like I had to approach showing and hiding a little pop-up on a web page when a certain entry that I got back from a REST API had a field set to be one value. If it was set to be like, a hello, I wanted it to show. And if it was set to be something else, I wanted it to hide.
Yeah.
And like, that's not too hard, but then like what really made it complex is you could select multiple of these things. And if any one of them were set to one of those values, it should hide. But like, if none of them were selected, then it should show. So there's a sort of a complicated nested sequence of steps and like logic. And I had to basically like think through the whole thing, draw out like a diagram and like walk through and make sure I got all the logic correct. I mean, that maybe kind of sounds kind of abstract and complicated, but it's like I'm still dealing with the same kinds of problems. It's just they're at a higher level. So Tony asked, the first day of optional parts for the homework was Wednesday. I think so. Yeah, I think yesterday.
Was that yesterday?
Yeah, that was yesterday.
Okay, I just want to make sure I didn't miss any. So it was okay. I don't think it was Tuesday. I feel like okay. All right, thank you.
Yep. Okay, seems like we're starting to lose people here, but that's fine. Remember, we're going to be doing office hours on Saturday at 11 a.m. in this call. So stop by. It's going to be but mostly a question and answer session about this stuff. And if we have time, I've got a special little surprise, but we'll see. So see you folks. Bye.